Hey guys, so we talked about the causes of World War II, or sorry, World War One. We got the long-term causes and the short-term spark of the war with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. We looked at kind of the war, the enthusiasm of the war at the beginning of when it broke out, and then as the reality of war in general, how horrible it was, especially this war, World War One, with all the new weapons and poison gas and machine guns and high explosives. Um, that people, the Europeans, quickly kind of realized, my gosh, this is terrible. So the war rages on. You got this stalemate in the trenches. Neither side really able to achieve any sort of advantage. Okay. Now, while this is going on, the United States is kind of sitting on the sidelines. They have adopted a policy of isolationism. So to be isolated, to be by itself, George Washington in his farewell address specifically stated to the United States, don't get involved in Europe's perpetual warfare. Like, don't worry about them. Let them fight amongst themselves. Not our business. Don't sweat it. And the United States has pretty much stuck to that policy since its beginning. But the United States is a world power. Everyone's kind of looking, are they going to become involved? Yes or no? And what are they going to do? Now, the thing is, obviously, we know the United States is going to enter the war. They're going to enter this war on the side of Britain and France against the Germans. But that wasn't always a guarantee. World War One isn't nearly as famous as World War Two. A lot of Americans look at World War One through the lens of World War Two because World War Two is way more famous. We love World War Two. And in World War II, as we'll talk about when we get there was a clear-cut bad guy. I mean, there was lots of bad guys, but there was the clear-cut enemy, and that was Hitler and Germany. That was never a doubt, like who the bad person was as far as the United States was concerned for World War II. So, because there was the obvious enemy in Germany for World War II, a lot of people today think that obviously the United States would have fought against Germany in World War One. That's not the case at all. Like, we didn't really have a horse in the race for World War One. There was plenty of reasons for us to join both sides. So it wasn't even a question of should we join. It was a question of like what side would we join, because there was reasons for both. At this time in America, the two largest ethnic groups were Irish Americans and German Americans. Okay, well, German Americans, obviously sided with Germany, even though they were loyal Americans and stuff, but they had, the ancestral, like, hey, we're from Germany, we like Germany. And Irish people traditionally hate Great Britain because Ireland and Great Britain have had lots of problems for a very, very long time. So, like, there was plenty of people in America that were like, yay, go Germany. Like, they weren't necessarily the bad guys. They were a monarchy that was fighting against other monarchies, and obviously the Allies hated the Central Powers and the Central Powers hated the Allies, but for us as a neutral country, it was kind of like, whatever. And there was also reason for us to support the Allies. Obviously, we speak English. We were founded by England. We have basically British law system and a lot of culture. So we're very similar to the British. There's a money issue at stake. And we also, so there was a transatlantic cable. It was like a legit cable that ran underneath the Atlantic Ocean that connected the United States to London, to England. Okay? Not London itself, but to England. And so we received our war basically directly through, or our war information directly through that cable. And so a lot of the stories that we were getting were from the British. And so they were, painting the British as the good guys and the Germans as the bad guys. So that was kind of swaying popular opinion. But there really wasn't a clear-cut reason for us to join either side. Well, that's going to change by the actions of the Germans. So what the United States wanted to do for World War One is make money. That's what we do in America. We make money. So we wanted to trade with both sides. We wanted to give supplies to England, give supplies to Germans. We don't care who wins. We just want to make as much money for everyone. Well, the English obviously didn't want us trading with the Germans, and the Germans didn't want us trading with the English. So both sides instituted what we call a blockade, which is when you physically prevent someone from trading with someone else. Now, here's the thing: the British. The British had a very traditional navy, big ships, big guns. Navy. The British Navy had ruled the seas since the Spanish Armada. They were the undisputed naval power in the world. Big ships, big guns, and so what they could do is they could use intimidation. They could park their big ships with their big guns off the northern coast of Germany. And if any American merchant ships, they could just level those guns and be like, hey, turn around. And if you're an American merchant ship, you're going to say, okay, like, you're not going to try that. Okay, they'd be like, bet. And you're like, you're going to try to run the gamut. And like, no, you're just going to be like, okay, yeah, we're cool. And you're going to turn around and leave. So the British could blockade non-violently just by sheer intimidation and their presence. And like, you're not going to mess with that. The Germans, however, because they knew that they could never compete with the traditional British big ships above water navy. They had invested their navy in submarines, okay, underwater craft that they could have an advantage, and they did have an advantage in that aspect. The thing about a submarine, though, what makes it, so deadly is you can't see it. You stay submerged. The enemy doesn't know you were there. Especially at this time, there wasn't as good of sonar, so it was hard to know exactly where they were. And you could fire your torpedoes and hopefully sink ships. But you couldn't really use intimidation. All right? You couldn't, if you saw an American merchant ship, you wouldn't, pop up to the surface like, hey, we're totally here. Turn around or else we'll blow you up, because now you're above the surface. You expose yourself to enemy ships or enemy airplanes that could spot you. And that's, or the end of the merchant ship could radio your place to the British, like, hey, by the way, there's a submarine around here. Why don't you guys go sink it? So you don't want to expose yourself. So for the Germans, for their submarines, you couldn't use intimidation. You just had to sink the ship. The British certainly did warn, say, hey, we have submarines in this area. Anyone who comes in here might get sunk. Like, they made that public declaration. But again, if you're a captain, there's a big difference between the British ship that you can clearly see, oh, there it is, we're not going to mess with it, versus like, well, there might be a submarine here, or there might not be. So, we'll take the chance kind of stuff. So the Germans engaged what they called unrestricted submarine warfare, where they'd sink any ship which might help the Allies. And that angered the United States, particularly when and there's the German submarine, when a certain ship was attacked, and that was the Lusitania. Okay, the Lusitania was a passenger ship, like a civilian, like a cruise ship, basically. It was the largest ship in the world, as that nice little advertisement says. And it was a passenger ship with civilians that was sunk by a German boat. Okay. So this was a huge incident. This is like a front page of the New York Times. Lusitania sunk. More people actually died in the Lusitania than died in the Titanic. People always love the Titanic, but the Lusitania was actually a bigger tragedy. And that, in America angered a lot of people. Some Americans died. This is like, civilians are supposed to be off limits, and now the Germans are attacking civilian ships. This angered a lot of people. The Germans, however, said, look, like, we sunk it because it was a military craft, that the British were smuggling military weapons on this passenger line and basically using the civilians as human shields, anticipating the Germans would never attack civilian ships. So it's like their fault for putting these civilians in their hands. And even some Americans criticized the British as well. So this is a cartoon with the condemning the British for using Americans as human shields to protect their boat, and Americans died because the British put them in danger, knowingly transporting military goods. So, but mostly it was blamed on the Germans. They're actually the ones who obviously perpetuated the attack. And as it turns out, as we know now, they actually were um, transporting military goods, ammunition, that kind of stuff. So the Germans, I guess, had a point, but they still did attack a civilian vessel, and a lot of people died. So here's U.S. patients going down. So the sinking of Lusitania was had a big effect, public opinion, for the Americans. So very, very angry, but still not enough to convince Congress to declare war. It's kind of, we're really angry, don't do it again, kind of stuff. And indeed, the Germans did temporarily agree to halt unrestricted submarine warfare, but they had every intention of continuing to do it. They knew, like, it was working. It was working. It was starving the British of military goods. The war was really, really desperate. It was kind of anyone could win, and the Germans were looking for any sort of advantage. So they had every intention of going back to unrestricted submarine warfare, knowing that in doing so might bring the Americans into the war. So what they tried to do was kind of prevent America from getting involved in a different way. So this is a telegram that was intercepted by the British. And it is from Germany to Mexico City. And as you can see, it was written in these codes. So the British got this thing and like, that's kind of, suspicious. Why is Germany talking to Mexico? What are they trying to say? So they went about decoding this. So they went through, and decoding is basically a process that uses very, very advanced mathematics and stuff to try to figure out what the crap these numbers all mean and break the code, and sure enough, they did. So here you can see kind of some of the translations over here, and you can see New Mexico, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. I wonder what's going on. And when they finally decoded the entire thing, they were super happy. Okay? So this is from the German ambassador Zimmerman. It became known as the Zimmerman Telegram, and the British were like, sweet, because they know what it says, and they knew that this is almost surely going to bring the United States into the war on our side. So basically with the Zimmerman Telegram, if you remember this from 7th grade and talking about it, basically Germany proposed to Mexico an alliance. Okay, so he said, all right, Mexico, here's what's going to happen. We're going to start unrestricted submarine warfare again. That's probably going to bring the Americans into the war, okay, which we don't want. So your job is to basically go to war with America and keep them busy. So you go to war, you keep the Americans busy over here. We're going to win the war in Europe, and then we're going to come over here and help you to defeat the United States. Okay? And we're going to help you regain your lost territory of New Mexico, Texas, Arizona. Okay? This is 1917. The Mexican-American War was only about 70 years before this. It was, people were still alive at this time who lived through the Mexican-American War. So this is still very, very fresh, deep wounds. And that was the proposition. Okay? Now, for America, this is an active war. This isn't just sinking a commercial vessel, as horrible as that is. This is Germany encouraging Mexico to declare war on them. That in of itself is an act of war. And they're going to go back on their word for unrestricted submarine warfare. This is too far. And this is going to encourage America to finally declare war and enter it on the side of the British. Okay? Would the Mexicans, so say this never got intercepted and it did get to Mexico and no one knew about it, would Mexico have actually adopted or agreed with this? No. Mexico has come out and said there's no reason why. A couple reasons. One, first of all, they didn't trust the Germans. They didn't think at all that Germany would or even capable of actually coming across the Atlantic and attacking America and keeping their end of the bargain. So it's whatever, bro. Second reason is that they literally cited the intense number of armed people in the United States. So they were This was like the Wild West, still kind of in the Southwest. Like they were basically worried about kind of like the redneck army of Texas, like rising up, um, and like being an armed force to stop the invasion of Mexico. So, um, they cited that, and say they did beat the Americans. They did get Texas and New Mexico and Arizona back. Like all those people living in those states aren't just be like, oh, we're part of Mexico now. Okay, cool. We'll just like accept that. There would have been rebellions and turmoil in those for like, forever. So Mexico would have never gone along with it. But for the British, who wanted Americans into the war, this was great for them, and for Germany was kind of disastrous. Um, but America's in the war now, and just like we saw with Britain and France and Germany and all the other countries in Europe that at first were like, yeah, we're going to do this. Same thing in America. Like a wave of patriotism, and again, America hadn't participated in a real war since the Civil War, which again was decades before this. So this was like all these young 18, 19-year-old boys were like, all right, this is our chance. We're going to be heroes. We're the ones going to be in the history books. So here's a song over there, which we would have listened to in class if we were in class. You can find it on YouTube if you want. It's got a lovely little melody that you'll all love. But again, Johnny, get your gun. You're going to be great. Every son of liberty. Your daddy's going to be glad. Tell your sweetheart not to be sad. Like everything's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Yankee Doodle. So it's all patriotism and honor, and everyone's going to love you and all that kind of stuff that every other country was. And just like every other country, Americans are going to be in for a rude awakening once they get here. Winter assignments is to look at war propaganda. So here's some other pictures for you. So this is probably the most famous singular piece of, the "I Want You," Uncle Sam, for the Navy. Okay, and different types. So the goal is to get you to join the war or participate in the war effort in some ways. And so what the government is going to do is they're going to make all these different types of propaganda, because people have different motivations. So, say you're, patriotic. I want you for the U.S. Navy, red, white, or U.S. Army. You got red, white, and blue, and like, yeah, I'm patriotic. I'm going to join. This one using a attractive young female. Who are we trying to get to join the Navy? Well, it's not girls, it's boys, 18, 19, 20-year-old boys. So maybe like, hey, if I join the Navy, all the girls are going to like me and that kind of stuff. You can see quite clearly how this is worded. I want you, ... for the Navy. So if I'm a 18, 19, 20-year-old boy and I'm like, should I join the war or not? And I see this and it's this young girl, I want you, like, hey, I'm going to join the Navy because that's going to get me the girls and that's what I care about. Or maybe I'm very religious. So this is equating the Crusaders of the Middle Ages going to the Holy Land, in the name of God, Deus Vult, God wills it, with the American Expeditionary Force. General Pershing was the commander, the U.S. general in charge. So you'd be doing basically your duty for God by joining the military. It's hard to see, I know. But this is a woman. She has her baby in her arms, and they're underwater. Okay, so think about what incident is this trying to show with this woman underwater. Here's a fish here. Okay, cradling her baby. This is the Lusitania. So this is basically motivating people by revenge. And this is great. Good propaganda uses as few words as possible. They don't want you to have to sit there and read a paragraph of what they want you to do. They want you to see the poster and instantly know what you're supposed to do as you're just kind of walking by in the street. This, enlist. Why do I enlist? Because of revenge, because the Germans are terrible people that did terrible things. Okay, here's pulling on the emotional heartstrings. Using children always works. My daddy loves me. Does your daddy love you? Because he bought me war bonds, and your daddy should buy you war bonds too. Or uses fear. Oh my gosh, the Germans are so scary. That kind of stuff. So World War One is broken out. America's involved now, and we are gonna get over there and join this war effort, which for the Allies didn't come a moment too soon because they'd all just lost one of their major allies in Russia that we'll talk about in our next video.